Giant Brian, one of the world's most infamous criminals, sentenced to 2 years for stealing a lifetime supply of Fredo Frogs from his local Tesco Express. He found himself in Centre Perks, an institution staffed by some of the best policemen and policewomen from across the globe. Some would say he deserved it, but in his opinion, people just didn't understand, and he wasn't gonna let society chain him up. No, he didn't play by the rules. Giant Brian was going to escape. Day 1, he woke up in his cell. Prison cell? More like prison hell, he thought to himself as he walked on over to roll call. Brian looked around at the other scum he had been dumped in with. There was no way he was staying here with this bunch of losers. It was humiliating. They even had a camera crew filming a documentary on this whole mess. He went over to the cafeteria to get his breakfast. Wait, hold on. Nobody tells the infamous Giant Brian when to eat his breakfast. Goodness, he had to escape this place straight away, and he made a dash for the nearest exit. Damn it, it seems they lock the doors in this place. Escaping prison might be a bit harder than he had first thought. He went and had a drum on the bongos to calm himself down. Feeling disappointed, Brian returned to the cafeteria where the other inmates were now having lunch. But his spirits were lifted when he went to open the cutlery drawer, and he found a whole bunch of plastic knives. The fools! They just leave weapons out in the open for anyone to take. Giant Brian was trained in all forms of combat, and with a plastic knife in hand, breaking out would be easy. He would just have to stab everyone, but then he saw that it was job time, and he had a change of heart. Wait, you can get a job in prison? This was perfect. He would just earn enough money to pay back Tesco for the Fredo Frogs he had stolen, and they would drop his charges and let him go, no questions asked. He headed over to the job centre full of anticipation. What job were they going to give him? But, oh, they didn't offer him anything. Perhaps he didn't seem very employable, or maybe it's because he was carrying a giant plastic knife during the interview. There must be some other way to make money, he thought. Maybe he could be the star of this prison documentary they were filming, or perhaps he would take this chance to get to know some of his fellow inmates. Whilst in the showers, he approached a young man named Bendrick. Bendrick said that another prisoner named Warmballs had stolen his screwdriver. And what's more, if Brian could get it back, he would pay him for the favour. Without hesitation, Brian went downstairs, found Warmball's desk, and peeked inside. But the screwdriver wasn't there. Thankfully, Warmballs himself passed by just a moment later, and, using his plastic knife, Brian beat him up and found the screwdriver in his pocket. Upon returning it to Bendrick, bang! Instant money. And with all these other prisoners about such as Rafflecopter, Gubbins, Codebreaker, Ron Johnson, and Judi Dench, Brian was about to be filthy rich. He went to bed that night dreaming of nothing but coins, and the next day he accepted a bunch more quests. Mr. Gears wanted him to get rid of a contraband magazine. Hey, no problem Mr. Gears, and he flushed it down the toilet. Codebreaker wanted Brian to flood Tony No-Nose's room. Hey, no problem, Codebreaker, and he flushed a bunch more things down the toilet. Wendy Nails wanted him to get rid of a paperclip for her. Hey, no problem, Wendy, you get the point by now, he flushed it down the toilet, but soon, Brian was practically made of money. All that was left was one final quest, and it was the most well-paid of them all. Tiny Tim wanted him to usurp Gubbins from her mail sorting job. Brian found out where Gubbins was working, but unfortunately, due to his unemployment, he was unable to get through the door. So, the next day he followed her around until she was all alone, beat her up with his plastic knife, then tied her up with duct tape and carried her away. It was all going so well until he reached the stairs, and he wasn't strong enough to carry her down them. Whilst he was searching for an alternative route, she regained consciousness and escaped his grasp. He then tried again by waiting outside of the mail sorting room, but before he could tie her up this time, a medic arrived and swept her away to the hospital. He then tried a third time, but in this case she was able to dodge past him. In all of the commotion, Officer Marmalade had got a bit confused, and she burst into the mailroom to knock Gubbins unconscious again. I'm a bit worried about Gubbins at this point actually, can we at least check for a concussion? Giant Brian was frustrated that the police had done his job for him, and he beat up Officer Marmalade, stole her keys, and went on a rampage. It wasn't much time before he was apprehended, however, and the prison was sent into lockdown. Two things were now clear to Brian. Number one, he had had enough with the goddamn feds always being on his case. And number two, he needed to get stronger. He trained and trained and trained until he was as strong as 4 men. Probably 5 if he'd remembered to eat his porridge in the prison cafeteria that morning. Now, all he needed was some tools. His plastic knife had served him well up until now, but if he was honest, he would rather use it to eat things with. He went into his crafting menu in search of a new weapon, but he had worked out so much that his brain had become incredibly small. He had to become smart, and for this, he needed to read. Okay, we can skip the training montage this time. Giant Brian was so educated now that even his fellow prison mate and famous diary author Samuel Peeps gave him the time of day. And, using his new intellect, he fashioned himself up— Excuse me, Ron Johnson, I'm actually in the middle of something here. Get out of here, Ron Johnson, get out! He fashioned himself some armor and a whip using duct tape, some wire, and a big stick. Now, it was showtime. His plan was to beat up every policeman in the whole prison. In fact, here was one now. Take this, Officer Templeton, take this, and then he was knocked unconscious and had to craft all of his items again. But this time, he was back with a vengeance. Officer Drainpipe was taken down in a second. He tried to tie her up, but she was carried away by the medic again. No matter, because Giant Brian was pumped up and he had a taste for blood. His next victim was Officer Todgers. Okay, I'll just put you there. And after that, it was Officer Bonser's turn to taste the crack of his whip. Then, it was Officer Whippet. Oh, sorry Samuel Peeps, you got caught in the crossfire a bit there. And finally, it was Officer. By this point, he'd damn near taken out every rozzer in this godforsaken institute. But hold on, what's this? Why is everyone getting back up? You were supposed to be defeated, you're supposed to be unconscious. Oh god, there's so many of them! Abort the mission! Retreat, Brian, run for your life! You would have thought at this point that Brian might have faced some sort of punishment. Maybe detained, maybe put in solitary confinement, but this is the first level of the game, and he was fine. Which meant it was time to go again, baby, let's go, Brian! This time, Brian couldn't be bothered to make a whip, so instead he just bonked the officers on the head with a big stick. Eventually, he did so much bonking that they began to set the dogs on him, and he knew now it was make or break. He grabbed whichever keys he could find and made a dash for the doors. Before he could make it too far though, the K9 squad was on his tail, and he fell victim to the Paw Patrol. Now, you might have thought at this point Brian would have faced some sort of punishment, maybe solitary confinement, but no, he was fine. And this of course meant he could go once again, baby. I feel like I'm repeating myself here. But let's be honest, bonking people wasn't getting him very far, and he didn't spend all of that time in the library for nothing. No. Now commenced Phase 2, also known as Strategic Bonking. You see, during his previous raid, Brian had come into possession of the red key, which was normally carried by Officer. He knew from his time spent searching the prison perimeter that there was in fact a red door, which, if opened, would place him only one fence away from total freedom. All he needed now was a pair of fence cutters, which he made out of 2 files and a roll of duct tape, and, scavenging a hammer from someone's desk, he was ready to bonk, but this time with purpose. Brian hunted down Officer and let her guard down by making small talk with her in the cafeteria. So, nice food they have in this place. He then followed her around and waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. Bam! A few hammer blows and Officer was toast. Brian picked her up, took her into the next room, and swiped the red key. It was now a race against time. He had to make it down to the red door before Officer was discovered. He sprinted down the hallway and outside, but hold on, what's that hit marker for? Oh my god, he was being shot! There was a sniper! Oh goodness, Brian, run! He got through the red door, pulled out the wire cutters, and just as he was about to escape... You would think at this point that Brian might receive some sort of punishment, and okay, this time he was put in solitary confinement. Well, I guess this is it, Brian. The end of the road. Nothing better to do now than spend the rest of your days peeling potatoes. He wished he still had his plastic knife so that peeling would be so much easier, but wait, that was it! Brian had been on the right track from the very beginning. Only he had picked the wrong type of plastic cutlery. A plastic knife was only good for stabbing people, whereas a plastic fork, well, a plastic fork could do anything. As soon as he was out of solitary confinement, he went to the cafeteria, stocked himself fully with plastic forks, and ran back to the perimeter. This time, he wouldn't escape through the fence, he would escape through the wall. For hours and hours he chiseled away at the concrete, taking away 1% of its durability each time, and Jesus, Brian, this is going to take forever. But Brian wasn't giving up that easy. He figured out that a crowbar is essentially just a metal version of a big plastic fork. And after beating up his fellow inmate, Mystic Meg, which took a couple of tries as she was surprisingly strong for an old woman, he stole all of her money and used it to buy a crowbar from Wendy Nails. Then he crafted a bed dummy so the cops wouldn't realise he was missing, and that night he snuck back out to the wall and tunnelled his way through. It only took a few hits with the crowbar before the wall busted open and he ran outside. He could finally smell the sweet, sweet stench of freedom. He felt the wind blowing through his non-existent hair. But then, oh no! The camera crew who were filming a prison documentary had followed him outside, and they were giving away his position. He made a dash for it, but the cops were onto him. A whole group of Rozzers right on his tail. Would he make it? Would he escape? Or would he be arrested? Again?